You're going to rot here. The only way you're leaving is in a coffin." My own son's words echoed in my ears like daggers as he shoved me violently into the storage room of the high-rise apartment. The sound of my phone smashing against the concrete floor was the last thing I heard before the lock clicked from the outside. He had destroyed my only connection to the outside world. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of from. I want to know how far it's traveled, because this story is going to leave you speechless. And now I was completely alone, without food, without water, abandoned like an animal in a cage. My heart hammered so hard against my ribs, I thought it would break free. At 66, after giving my entire life to this ungrateful son, I found myself imprisoned by his own hands, condemned to die of thirst and starvation, while he was off on a luxury cruise with Veronica, his wife, and that terrible mother-in-law, who manipulated him so much. But let me tell you how I got here, how the woman who was once the center of a happy family ended up a prisoner of her own blood. My name is Clara. For 40 years, I believed I had built a strong family, one filled with love and sacrifice. I had worked since I was 18 as seamstress in a small textile factory downtown. My hands rough from so much sewing and embroidery held our family together after my husband left us when our son Edward was only 8 years old. From that moment on, Edward became my reason for living the engine that pushed me out of bed before sunrise every morning so I could get to work on time. I remember the day I decided I would do anything to give my son the life he deserved. It was a rainy Tuesday in October, and Edward came home crying because the other kids were making fun of his worn-out sneakers. That night, while he slept, I counted every dollar I had saved for months to buy myself a new dress. Money I immediately used to buy him the best sneakers in the store. Seeing his smile the next day was worth more than any outfit I could have bought for myself. That's how the years passed. Every extra dollar, every hour of overtime, every moment of rest I sacrificed, it was all for him. When he turned 16, I worked double shifts to buy him the motorcycle he wanted so badly. At 21, I mortgaged my small apartment to pay for his college education in engineering. I never complained. I never asked for anything in return. I truly believed a mother should give everything for her children without expecting anything back but their love and respect. Edward graduated with honors and got an excellent job at a construction company. I felt like the proudest woman in the world when I saw him leave every morning in his sharp suit carrying his leather briefcase. My son is a successful professional. I'd tell my neighbors with a smile that came from my soul. For the first few years after he graduated, our relationship seemed perfect. He visited regularly, took me out to elegant dinners, and always told me how grateful he was for all my sacrifices. Everything changed when he met Veronica. The first time he introduced her to me, something inside me cringed. It wasn't just her cold, calculating demeanor, but the way she looked at my son as if he were an investment that needed to be protected from outside influences. Veronica was a 32-year-old woman, tall, with perfectly styled brunette hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. She worked as an administrator at a private clinic, and from the very start, she made it clear that she considered Edward's family, specifically me, to be beneath her social standards. During the first few months they were dating, I tried to get closer to her. I cooked her favorite dishes when they came to visit. I bought her small gifts with my few savings. I even learned to cook sophisticated meals that I knew she liked. But every gesture of love from me was met with a fake smile and sarcastic comments that my son either didn't notice or worse, chose to ignore. "Clara, don't go to so much trouble," Veronica would say with that sugary voice that got on my nerves. "We don't need you to do all this. We're not kids anymore." But I could see the disdain in her eyes, the contempt for the older woman who had raised the man she now considered her property. The wedding took place 2 years later at a fancy hall that cost more than $20,000. I, who had dreamed for years about the day my son would get married, felt like a stranger in my own family. Veronica had organized everything without consulting me, from the guest list to the color of the flowers. When I tried to suggest that maybe we could include some family traditions that had been important to us, she looked at me as if I had said something completely ridiculous. "Clara, dear," she said with that condescending tone I had already started to recognize. "This is a modern celebration. I don't think our guests would appreciate those old-fashioned customs." Edward, who used to defend me against any derogatory comment, simply nodded and changed the subject. On the wedding day, I sat in the front row wearing a green dress I had bought at a discount store, feeling small and invisible as I watched my son promise forever to a woman who had already started to pull him away from me. During the ceremony, when the officiant spoke about the importance of family and respect for parents, I saw Veronica squeeze Edward's hand with a smile that chilled me to the bone. That night, as I was clearing the dishes from the small dinner I had hosted in my apartment for our closest relatives, I happened to overhear a conversation between Veronica and her mother in the hallway. "Now that we're married, we need to set clear boundaries," Veronica was saying in a voice she had never used in front of me. "Edward is too soft with his mother. She thinks she can still control his life, but those days are over." "You're right, honey," her mother replied with a cruel laugh. "Men need their wives to open their eyes to these things. A meddling mother-in-law can ruin a marriage before it even starts." I froze behind the door, feeling every word like a slap in the face. The woman I had made so many efforts for, whom I had tried to love like a daughter, was already planning my exclusion from my own son's life. I finished cleaning the kitchen in silence, tears streaming down my cheeks, wondering if Edward knew what his new wife really thought of me, or if he had simply chosen to ignore it to keep the peace in his marriage. That night, for the first time in years, I went to sleep with an emptiness in my chest that I didn't know how to fill. The following months confirmed my worst fears. Edward's visits became more and more sporadic, and when he came, he was always with Veronica, and for shorter and shorter periods. The conversations that used to flow naturally between us became tense and superficial, constantly interrupted by subtle but hurtful comments from his wife. "Edward, don't forget we have that dinner with my parents," Veronica would say every time my son seemed to be enjoying our conversation. Or even worse, "Honey, your mother looks tired. Maybe we should go so she can rest." As if I were a decrepit old woman who needed to be cared for instead of a vibrant woman who simply wanted to spend time with her son. But what hurt me the most was seeing how Edward had begun to change the loving and considerate son I had raised, was transforming into a distant stranger, someone who seemed to be ashamed of his humble beginnings and of the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. The sound of my phone shattering against the hard floor of that storage room still echoes in my mind like broken glass cutting deep into flesh. My son, my only child, the boy for whom I gave my youth, my health, and my very soul had locked me inside as if I were nothing more than a burden to discard. His words remain carved into me, "You'll rot here. The only way you're leaving is in a coffin." At 66, after decades of sacrifice, I was not honored as a mother. I was treated like a prisoner, humiliated by the very blood I had carried under my heart. That pain was not a simple sting. It was a crushing, unbearable agony, the kind that twists your breath and makes you question if love had ever truly existed. For years, I had convinced myself that Edward loved me, that he respected the sacrifices I had made to give him the life he enjoyed. I remembered his small hand clutching mine when he was 8, when his father abandoned us, leaving me to hold together the ruins of our family, with nothing but needle thread and sheer determination. Every memory was a stitch in the fabric of my devotion. I worked long hours at the factory until my fingers bled. I skipped meals so he could eat. I went without shoes so his feet could be covered. And when he wanted to go to college, I mortgaged my tiny apartment to make it possible. I believed I knew that such love would return to me in the form of gratitude. But gratitude never came. Instead, came Veronica. From the moment she entered our lives, her eyes looked at me as though I were an inconvenience, a piece of furniture cluttering the corner of her new world. Her smile was painted not real, and every word dripped with false sweetness. And Edward? My Edward. He drank her words as if they were holy scripture. The wedding was my first true humiliation. She arranged everything without once asking my opinion, me the mother of the groom. I wore a discount dress in a sea of satin and silk, invisible in the very moment that should have been the culmination of all my years of toil. During the vows, when the officiant spoke about honoring parents, Veronica's fingers squeezed Edward's hand with a look of possession that pierced my chest. I felt erased, like my existence was an obstacle they had already agreed to bulldoze. That night, as I cleaned up after a small gathering at my apartment, I overheard Veronica and her mother laughing in the hallway. Their words were knives. Edward is too soft with his mother. Those days are over. Those days are over. I swallowed my tears because I wanted to believe Edward would defend me. He didn't. His silence was the cruelest betrayal of all. Months passed and the distance grew. Weekly visits turned into monthly appearances, always hurried, always orchestrated by Veronica. She spoke of better neighborhoods, higher class of people and boundaries, while Edward sat quietly nodding as though her contempt was gospel truth. The boy who once clung to me for comfort now looked ashamed of me. My meals, once his favorite, were dismissed. My conversations, once his joy, were cut short with excuses about work dinners and social obligations. And then came the day that broke me, when illness left me fevered and frightened, and my son chose a kitchen renovation over his mother's cries for help. I begged him on the phone, my voice trembling. "Please, Edward, I need you just for an hour." His reply, "Marlene, Veronica says adults need to take care of themselves. Don't be so dramatic." That night, lying in bed drenched in sweat, I understood that I had lost him, not to death, but to something worse, indifference. It was Grace, my 70-year-old neighbor, who nursed me back. She brought soup medicine and gentle words. "Clara," she told me one evening while changing my sheets, "a son who can abandon his mother like this, that's not normal. Something is very wrong." Her words cut, but they also awakened me. For too long I had accepted Edward's neglect as the price of love. But real love does not humiliate, does not abandon, does not betray. One afternoon, as I sorted through old papers in my bedroom, I discovered something I had forgotten, a sealed envelope hidden inside the back of my sewing box. It was a letter from my late husband, written years before he left us. My hand shook as I opened it. In uneven handwriting, he had scrawled, "Clara, you must be careful with Edward. He is bright, yes, but he has a streak of selfishness I cannot bend. If he grows without boundaries, he may turn cruel. Promise me you will be strong even against him." The words struck me like thunder. My husband had seen it decades earlier, the seed of arrogance in Edward's heart, and I had watered that seed with my sacrifices. I had nurtured it until it grew into the poison tree now threatening to strangle me. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to see the truth. I had not only lost my son, I had raised the very hand that was now striking me down. From that day forward, something inside me shifted. My tears dried into salt. My spine straightened. The humiliation I had endured hardened into resolve. If Edward wanted space, he would have it, but on my terms, not his. If Veronica wanted boundaries, I would build walls stronger than any she could imagine. And when Edward came again demanding that I cook Veronica's favorite lasagna for a dinner party, I did something I had never done before. I said no. His stunned silence was almost comical. Other plans, I told him calmly. He sputtered in disbelief as though my life had no right to contain anything but his demands. For the first time, I felt power return to my veins. I know now that my story is not unique. Too many mothers give everything only to be discarded when they are no longer useful. But let me ask you this. If your own child looked you in the eye and treated you not as a parent, but as a burden, would you keep forgiving, or would you finally say, enough? Press 0 if you believe forgiveness has no limits. Press 1 if you believe there comes a time to set yourself free. When I finally told Edward no when I refused to cook for his wife's dinner party, I thought I had found strength. For the first time in decades, I had stood tall. But strength can be a fragile thing, and pride can dissolve quickly when you realize you are standing completely alone. Edward's face that day hardened into stone. Veronica's voice dripped with venom. "See, I told you she's useless now," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. They left my apartment with a slam of the door, and the silence that followed felt like a tomb closing. At first I told myself I had done the right thing. That night, I made myself tea, trying to savor the taste of freedom. But freedom without love is a cold meal. And when morning came, and there was no call, no visit, no knock on the door from Edward, I felt the silence pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. Days turned into weeks. My phone sat lifeless, untouched by his number. No invitations, no apologies, not even a message. It was as if my single act of resistance had erased me from his life. The loneliness was suffocating. I would walk to the market and see other mothers laughing with their children, young and old, and wonder if perhaps I had made a terrible mistake. Maybe if I had just stayed silent, just kept cooking and sacrificing, at least I would still have Edward near me. Instead, I was alone with the echo of my own footsteps in the apartment and the tick of the clock reminding me that each day passed without him. I had thought betrayal was painful when it first arrived, but true despair is not the sharp pain of a knife. It is the slow, endless drowning of silence. One evening, as I prepared to lock my door for the night, I saw something on the floor. An envelope slipped under the doorframe. My heart jumped. For a moment, I imagined Edward had written me a note, a peace offering, a sign of love. With trembling fingers, I opened it. But instead of love, there were only 4 words in thick black ink. "You will regret this." I froze. My breath caught. The note had no signature, but I didn't need one. I knew that handwriting. Veronica's sharp loops, her cruel flourish at the end of every letter. That night, I did not sleep. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind rattling the windows felt like footsteps creeping closer. My apartment, once a safe refuge, felt like a coffin. I drew the curtains tight, but the darkness pressed against me, whispering that I was trapped. The second note came 3 days later. "Stay out of our lives, or we'll make sure you disappear." The words blurred as tears burned my eyes. I sank to the floor, clutching the paper, rocking like a child, asking myself how my son could allow this. How could Edward stand by while the woman he married waged war against his own mother? Was his silence consent, or worse, encouragement? I wanted to believe he was innocent. But when I remembered his cold eyes the last time we spoke, I realized the truth. Edward had already buried me in his heart. I was dead to him long before the notes arrived. That realization crushed me. My days blurred into nights. I stopped cooking. I stopped going outside. I let the dust gather on the shelves. Even Grace, my faithful neighbor, began to worry. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling with concern, "you can't live like this. You're fading away." I nodded, but inside I felt like a hollow shell. I no longer existed as a mother, as a woman, as a person. I was a ghost, haunting my own apartment. Sometimes late at night I would scroll through my phone, reading Reddit revenge stories, tales of betrayal of mothers cast aside, of families torn apart by greed and cruelty. Some of those stories ended in justice, others in tragedy. I would whisper to myself, "That's me. I'm one of those Reddit revenge stories now." The third note nearly broke me. It said, "We'll take everything you own, one way or another." This time, there was no doubt. Edward's signature was scrawled beneath the words. My son had written it. My own flesh and blood had threatened to strip me of the last pieces of my life. I felt as though the walls of the apartment had caved in. I couldn't breathe. I collapsed on the couch, clutching the note, sobbing until my body shook. It was as if I had been buried alive, the dirt pouring over me, filling my lungs, suffocating me, while the world outside went on as if nothing had happened. This was no longer just betrayal. This was annihilation. In those endless hours of despair, I thought about my late husband's letter, again the warning he had written decades earlier. If he grows without boundaries, he may turn cruel. He had been right. I had ignored it. And now the cruelty had bloomed into full darkness, consuming Edward until nothing of my son remained. I wanted to scream. I wanted to die. And yet somewhere deep inside, a spark still whispered, "Survive. Just survive this night." So I endured, hour by hour, breath by breath. I share this not to shock you, but because I know some of you listening have lived through betrayals that left you hollow. Maybe not by a child, but by a friend, a spouse, a sibling. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just wound it, buries you. That night, as I sat in the dark, I told myself if I lived until morning, if I could just make it through, I would tell my story. And maybe it would one day stand among those Reddit revenge stories that do not end in silence, but in justice. And so I ask you, the ones listening right now, if you were in my place, locked in loneliness, betrayed by your own blood, would you surrender to despair? Or would you fight to rise again? If my story has touched you, give this a like. It helps more than you know. The night I held Edward's threatening note, the one where his own hand declared he would take everything from me, something inside me shifted. Despair had been eating me alive for weeks, burying me under silence and fear. But now, with his signature scrawled beneath words of cruelty, despair twisted into something hotter, rage. Not the quiet anger of a mother disappointed, but a consuming fire that burned through every vein in my body. My hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. I looked around my little apartment, the home I had built, with decades of labor, the place where Edward had taken his first steps, spoken his first words, and realized they wanted to rip it all away, to erase me, to leave me with nothing. I had given him everything. And in return, he had chosen betrayal. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed every sacrifice, every humiliation, every dismissive look from Veronica, every cold silence from Edward. By morning, I was no longer the woman who had begged for scraps of affection. I was someone new, someone ready to fight. When I went to check my bank account that afternoon, my breath caught in my throat. The balance was lower than it should have been, much lower. I studied the withdrawal slip, and there it was, my name forged in clumsy strokes that tried to imitate my handwriting. My knees buckled. Edward. He had forged my signature. My son, my blood, had not only abandoned me emotionally, but stolen from me with his own hand. The fury that exploded inside me then was beyond anything I had ever known. It was a wildfire, unstoppable, devouring every ounce of sorrow I had carried. For the first time, I saw the truth with clarity so sharp it cut me. Edward was no longer my son. He was an enemy. I pressed the withdrawal slip against my chest, trembling, and whispered aloud, "Never again." I would not beg. I would not plead. I would not cower in silence while my own child and his wife tried to destroy me. I thought again of the stories I had read late at night, those Reddit family tales where mothers were crushed under the weight of betrayal, but some found strength to rise to turn the tide. For so long I had read them as a victim whispering, "That's me." But now something inside me screamed, "No more." My story won't end in ashes. My story will burn with justice. The first thing I did was reach out to Grace, my neighbor, the one soul who had stood by me. When she stepped into my apartment, I showed her the forged slip. Her eyes widened, her lips trembling. "Clara, this is fraud. This is theft. This, I said, my voice iron is proof. Proof that I'm not crazy. Proof that my son has crossed a line he can't return from. Grace placed her hand over mine. Then you fight Clara. You fight with everything you have left. Her words lit something in me. For years, I had allowed my love for Edward to chain me, to silence me, to make me believe that suffering was the price of motherhood. But that morning, those chains shattered. The next week, I began preparing quietly. I gathered receipts, notes, every cruel message, and now the forged bank document. I photographed each one, cataloged them neatly. My little living room became a war room, each folder another weapon. But I also prepared myself in another way. I looked into the mirror and forced myself to repeat, "You are not weak. You are not worthless. You are not disposable." At first, the words felt hollow, but with each day, with each repeat, I began to believe them. One evening, I even smiled an unfamiliar, dangerous smile. The kind of smile that said, "You thought I was finished. You were wrong." Then came the phone call. Edward, his voice colder than ever. "Mom, we need to talk. Tomorrow. Be ready, be ready." For months, those words would have filled me with dread. But this time, they sparked a strange calm. Because for the first time in this long, brutal ordeal, I truly was ready. I had the proof of his theft. I had the strength of my fury. And I had clarity, the kind of clarity that comes only when every illusion has been burned away. That night, as I prepared for his arrival, I thought again about the thousands of stories out there. Families broken by greed, parents betrayed by their children, strangers on the internet reading Reddit family tales and shaking their heads, saying, "How could anyone do this?" And I thought maybe one day someone will read my story. Maybe they'll find in it not only heartbreak but also strength. A reminder that no matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how suffocating the despair, a person can rise again when fire takes the place of tears. When Edward and Veronica arrived the next morning striding into my apartment as if they already owned it, I no longer trembled. I no longer felt buried. I looked them both in the eye, and for the first time in my life, they were the ones who shifted uncomfortably, because they could sense it too. Something had changed. I was no longer their victim. I was their reckoning. I want to ask you, the ones listening right now, if you were in my place, if the child you raised turned into the thief who betrayed you, would you stay silent? Or would you fight back, press 0 if you would endure in silence? Press 1 if you would rise and fight. When Edward and Veronica returned to my apartment, I could feel the storm before they even stepped inside. Their footsteps echoed down the hall like the drums of an advancing army. I had told myself I was ready, that my fury and my proof would be my shield. But when the door swung open without so much as a polite knock, my chest tightened. The air thickened instantly. Tension wrapped around me like a rope pulling tighter with every breath. "Sit down, Mom," Edward said sharply. It wasn't a request, it was a command. He sat in the same armchair where he had once curled as a little boy when I read him bedtime stories. That memory pierced me like a knife, but I pushed it away. This man was no longer that child. Veronica paced behind him, her heels clicking against the floor like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something terrible. She set her designer bag on my table as if staking a claim. "Let's not waste time." Edward began, his eyes cold. "We know about your little act last week, refusing to help us, talking to neighbors, spreading lies. That ends now." My throat went dry, but I forced myself to speak. "The lies are yours, Edward, and I can prove it." I held up the forged bank withdrawal slip. "You stole from me." For the first time, I saw his jaw tighten. He hadn't expected me to find it. Veronica leaned in, scanning the paper, and her lips curled into a smirk. "So what?" she hissed. "You think anyone will believe you? You're old. You're unstable. And soon everyone will know it." Her words sliced through me, but I caught something else, a tiny red light blinking from the corner of the bookshelf. My eyes narrowed. A recording device, hidden among my photo frames. My stomach dropped. They were recording me, right here in my own living room. The realization made my skin crawl. Every word, every breath could be twisted against me. The suffocating tension became unbearable, like the walls themselves were listening. "You planted that," I whispered, pointing to the device. Edward didn't flinch. He almost smiled. "We need proof, Mom. Proof that you're unfit to handle your own affairs. Proof that you're unstable. Once we have it, the courts will make sure you can't touch your money, your house, anything. It will all be under my control." The room spun, but my fury steadied me. "So that's your plan, to paint me as insane, so you can legally strip me of everything not insane," Veronica corrected with mock sweetness. "Just incapable. It's for your own good." Those words, "for your own good," hit me like poison. They were the same words they had thrown at me every time they twisted the knife. I stood, my hands trembling, but not with fear. This was rage burning through me. "You've stolen, you've threatened, and now you dare spy on me in my own home. Do you hear yourselves? This isn't care. This is war." Edward shot to his feet, his height towering over me. For a moment, we were inches apart, his shadow swallowing mine. "Be careful what you say," he growled. "You don't want this to get ugly." The air between us felt electric dangerous. I could smell his cologne, sharp and suffocating. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he might actually hurt me physically the way his words had hurt me for months. But I didn't back down. Not this time. "You've already made it ugly," I said evenly. "You crossed that line when you stopped being my son." Veronica picked up the recording device from the shelf, waving it like a weapon. "Oh, this is gold. You admitting you think your son is no longer your son, a judge will eat that alive. You're emotional, unstable, paranoid. You're destroying yourself, Clara, and we're just letting you talk." Her laughter filled the room, shrill and cruel. The tension was unbearable, every breath heavy, every second balanced on the edge of violence. But in that unbearable moment, something inside me hardened like steel. I walked straight to her, grabbed the recorder out of her hand, and slammed it on the floor. It shattered into pieces, the red light flickering out. The silence afterward was deafening. Edward's face flushed with rage. "What did you just do?" I ended your little game, I spat. "If you want to destroy me, you'll have to do it without hiding in the shadows. Face me, look me in the eye, and admit what you've become." For a long second, none of us moved. It felt like the standoff of a duel in some old frontier story, 3 figures locked in a room, the tension so sharp it could cut the air. Finally, Edward broke it. He leaned forward, his voice low, dripping with menace. "You just declared war, Mom. And wars have casualties." My body trembled, but not with weakness. This time, the tremor came from the sheer force of the confrontation, like a dam straining against floodwaters. The stakes were no longer whispers, no longer notes slipped under doors. This was face-to-face threat for threat. And yet I felt a clarity I had never known. I met his eyes. "Then prepare yourself, Edward, because I won't go down quietly." The moment hung between us like a blade suspended in midair. Every heartbeat was a countdown. One wrong word, one wrong move, and the fragile line between family conflict and outright destruction would snap. Finally, Edward turned, grabbing Veronica's arm. "We're done here," he barked, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. There was a crack in his armor now, a crack I had made. They stormed out the door, slamming so hard the walls shook. But the silence they left behind was not the silence of despair. This time, it was the silence before a battle. I sank into my chair, my chest heaving. The living room still felt charged, like the aftermath of lightning. My son had declared war, and I had answered. The duel had begun. I share this moment with you because many of you listening know what it's like to face someone you love turned enemy. The suffocating tension, the threats unspoken and spoken, the feeling that every breath could ignite a fire. Let me ask you, if you stood where I stood, cornered, threatened, betrayed in your own home, would you break or would you fight? The silence after Edward and Veronica stormed out was unbearable, yet strangely empowering. My heart pounded in my chest, still echoing with his words. Wars have casualties. I sat alone in the charged quiet of my living room, my breath ragged my hands, still trembling from the shattered recorder on the floor. But this trembling was no longer fear. It was the raw aftermath of a decision made. I had declared my stand. And once a stand is declared, there is no turning back. The following morning, I called Mr. Harlow, the lawyer who had once helped me prepare my will years ago. He listened carefully as I explained everything: the threats, the forged bank, slipped the spying device hidden in my home. There was a pause on the other end, then his voice steady and sharp. Clara, what they are doing is not only immoral, it's criminal. Elder abuse, fraud, intimidation. You need witnesses, documentation, and the courage to take this forward. Do you have all three? I closed my eyes. Images flashed Edward as a boy with scraped knees, Veronica's cold smirk, the blinking red light of the recorder. I swallowed hard. Yes, I whispered. I have them now. Later that day, I knocked on Mark's door, my neighbor across the hall. He was a retired journalist, the kind of man who had spent decades digging into stories of corruption and betrayal. I showed him the forged bank slip, the threatening notes, the broken recorder. His eyebrows shot up and a slow whistle escaped his lips. Clara, this isn't just family drama. This is a case study in manipulation and greed. People need to know this happens behind closed doors. I nodded. Then help me make sure the truth is seen. He agreed without hesitation. And in that moment, I felt a violent surge of relief, as if chains that had bound me for decades finally snapped. For once, I was no longer fighting alone. When Edward called the next day demanding to settle matters once and for all, my voice was calm, almost icy. Come by tomorrow, I said. I'll be ready. He heard submission in my words, but in truth, I was setting the stage for justice. Because tomorrow Mark and Mr. Harlow would be waiting in my apartment, hidden but listening. Tomorrow their cruelty would no longer echo only in my heart. It would be recorded, witnessed, undeniable. The day arrived heavy with anticipation. I brewed tea with steady hands, though my heart pounded like a drum. Mark sat quietly in the kitchen notebook, open his old recorder ready. Mr. Harlow reviewed legal documents at my table, his sharp eyes glinting behind thin glasses. Then the knock, heavy, impatient, the knock of people who believed they were about to win. I opened the door. Edward walked in with his usual arrogance, Veronica trailing behind in another expensive suit, her perfume stinging the air. Good Edward said, scanning the room, "You've come to your senses. Now let's get this over with." I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. What is it you want this time? Veronica leaned forward, her voice syrupy and sharp. We've spoken with a financial advisor. If you sign over power of attorney to Edward, everything will be easier. No more confusion, no more instability. The word instability landed like venom. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. So you're asking me to give you legal control over everything I own, Edward smirked. That's right, for your own good. The phrase was a trigger now, but instead of crushing me, it fueled me. I felt the fury surge, but this time it was controlled, channeled. You've stolen, you've threatened, you've spied on me in my own home, I said slowly, my voice ringing with clarity. And now you want me to sign away my life. Tell me, Edward, do you even hear yourself anymore? He waved dismissively. Spare us the drama, Mom. You don't know how to manage things anymore. You'll just lose it all. I'm protecting you, Veronica added. If you resist, we'll make sure everyone knows you're unfit. We'll bring witnesses, doctors, whoever it takes. I smiled, then a smile that startled them both. Because it wasn't broken. It was sharp, dangerous. Funny you should mention witnesses, I said. At that moment, Mark stepped out from the kitchen, recorder in hand. Mr. Harlow rose from the table, papers tucked under his arm. Edward's smirk vanished, his face paling. Veronica's eyes widened, darting from me to the two men. "What is this?" Edward demanded, his voice cracking. "This," I said, rising to my feet, "is justice." Mark pressed play. Their own words from moments ago filled the room, Edward demanding power of attorney Veronica, threatening to ruin me. The sound was undeniable, damning. Mr. Harlow added calmly, "Everything here is legal evidence of elder fraud and coercion. If you proceed, you'll be facing charges." The color drained from Veronica's face. She clutched Edward's arm, whispering fiercely. She set us up. Edward glared at me, his eyes burning with hatred. "How dare you? How dare I?" My voice cut through his. "How dare you? I gave you everything, Edward. My life, my money, my soul. And you tried to bury me alive. But you forgot one thing." I stepped closer, my voice thundering like a storm breaking. "You forgot I still have fire." The room crackled with silence. I could feel the justice burning through me, a blazing power that filled every corner of the apartment. For once they were speechless. For once they knew they were beaten. Edward sputtered, "This isn't over. We'll fight this in court." Mr. Harlow interrupted smoothly. "Then we'll see you there. But I assure you, with this evidence, with these witnesses, you don't stand a chance." Veronica's face twisted, her mask of control finally slipping. She grabbed her bag and hissed, "You'll regret this, Clara. You'll die alone." I lifted my chin, better alone in truth than surrounded by lies. They stormed out, slamming the door once again, but this time I didn't collapse into despair. I stood tall, my chest heaving, my spirit blazing, because for the first time in years I had tasted justice, and it was sweet, like lightning splitting the sky. I share this moment with you because many of you know what it's like to be silenced, to be cornered by those who should protect you. But sometimes, the greatest liberation comes when you strike back not with cruelty, but with truth. So let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you have laid down quietly, or would you have fought with fire? When the door slammed behind Edward and Veronica for the last time, I stood in my living room, surrounded by silence. But unlike before, this silence was not heavy. It was not suffocating. It was glorious. For the first time in decades, I was free. I pressed my hand against my chest and felt my heartbeat steady and strong. The same heart that had once trembled with despair was now calm, radiant, alive with purpose. I had walked through fire and I had not burned. I had risen. The days that followed were filled with a peace I had almost forgotten existed. I woke in the morning without dread, without waiting for the sound of Edward's demanding voice or Veronica's cutting laughter. The apartment felt like mine again, not a battlefield, not a cage, but a sanctuary. I brewed coffee and sat by the window watching the sun rise. Each golden ray seemed to whisper, "You did it. You survived. You reclaimed yourself." For so long, I had believed survival meant clinging to my son, even as he pushed me further into darkness. But now I understood survival meant letting go of chains disguised as love. Of course, there were legal steps that followed. Mr. Harlow filed motions with the court presenting the evidence Mark had carefully documented. Edward and Veronica tried to fight back, but every attempt collapsed under the weight of their own recorded words and forged signatures. The courts ruled swiftly. The power of attorney they sought was denied. My finances were placed under my sole protection, and every penny they had tried to steal was accounted for. But the true victory was not legal. It was spiritual. Because in every courtroom session, in every headline Mark published about elder abuse, I no longer felt ashamed. I no longer carried the burden of silence. I stood tall, my voice clear, my truth undeniable. Edward, my son, never came back after the judgment, not even to apologize. Perhaps one day he will. Perhaps one day he will find the man he used to be. But that is no longer my responsibility. I released him the way a bird is released from a cage, not out of love, but out of necessity, because keeping him close would only destroy me. And though that truth is painful, it is also liberating. In the weeks that followed, I began to rediscover life. I planted flowers on my balcony, bright marigolds, fiery geraniums, tender violets. I baked bread again, not for anyone else, but for the joy of filling my home with the scent of warmth and life. Grace came by, often bringing laughter back into my kitchen. Sometimes we shared tea with Mark, who would tell stories of his years as a reporter. We would laugh until our sides hurt, and in those moments I realized something family is not always blood. Family is those who stand beside you when storms rage, and for the first time in years I felt surrounded by family. One evening, as the sun set in blazing orange and purple, I stood at my window and whispered to myself, "You are enough." I had lived too long believing my worth depended on my son's approval, but now I saw clearly my worth was mine to decide. My dignity was not a gift to be granted or stolen. It was a crown I had worn all along, even when I forgot it was there. I felt like a phoenix rising from ashes I had once thought would bury me. My wings, though scarred, were stronger for the fire. And so to you listening to my story, I want to leave you with this truth. Love is sacred. Yes. Sacrifice has meaning, yes. But when love turns into chains, when sacrifice becomes exploitation, you must find the courage to say enough. Your dignity is not negotiable. Your worth is not conditional. No matter your age, no matter your scars, you have the right to stand tall, to claim freedom, to protect the light that burns inside you. If I, at 66, after decades of silence, could rise and reclaim my life, so can you. The pain of betrayal may never fully disappear, but it no longer defines me. What defines me now is the radiant serenity of knowing I am free. What defines me is the joy of living each day on my own terms. I am Clara. I am a mother, yes, but I am also more. I am a woman who survived. I am a woman reborn. And to you, thank you for walking through this journey with me. Thank you for listening, for feeling every tremor, every wound, every spark of fire in my story. If my story has touched you, if it has reminded you of your own strength, I invite you to stay with me for more. Subscribe to hear the next stories of courage, of betrayal, of hope. Leave a comment. Tell me what would you have done if you were in my place, and don't forget to watch the next video. Each one carries a piece of truth, a reminder that even in the darkest valleys there is always a way back to the light. That night, as I closed the curtains and prepared for bed, I whispered one final prayer of gratitude. Not for Edward, not for Veronica, but for myself, for finding my fire, for surviving the storm, for rising at last into the radiant dawn.